Welcome to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. The HiT cast offers a weekly look at Hollywood from a conservative point of view. Sick of media bias infecting Hollywood headlines? Tired of stars insulting your views? HiT has your back. Now, here's your host, Christian Toto.
Welcome to episode 95 of the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment. This week we're speaking with Brian Godawa, author, screenwriter, and film critic. He's got some really fascinating ideas about faith-based content in the 21st century, as well as some tips for conservatives who want to work around industry gatekeepers. You might just be inspired to start creating something new after our chat. This week's show is sponsored by the new Harry Potter prequel. This franchise runs on autopilot. Why bother even name-checking the title? You know, I almost turned down the chance to interview last week's HitCast guest, and I'm really glad I didn't. Anthony Cumia lost his radio job after some racially insensitive tweets came to light. Reporters, as they often do, helped transform those comments into a fireable offense. SiriusXM did the rest. But that image hung in my mind when I was offered a chance to chat with him for the podcast. I can't interview him, I thought. Why not? Would I turn down a chat with, Alec Baldwin? After all his off-screen activities? I'm certain that they dwarf whatever Cumia did that day, or any other day sometimes. What about other stars with shaky past? Should I kind of write them off too? No one's writing off Baldwin at this point. He just keeps on keeping on. You know, I didn't even know the full story behind Cumia's situation. Maybe he was justified. Maybe he just had a very bad day. Maybe he sincerely regretted things he said. Should I be part of that media machine that just wants to wipe him off the face of the landscape, despite his talent, despite his intentions? Then I started listening to his show, heard on Compound Media. That's his home base. I was shocked again. You're not supposed to make jokes like that. That's wrong. Wait, why is it wrong? I've been brainwashed into thinking certain jokes are now off limits, inappropriate. You can't say them. The same jokes I laughed at 20 years ago when I used to listen to the radio with Howard Stern and other people. They were now off limit. You can't tell them anymore. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I've actually been internalizing what the PC police have taught me for years. So I just let go. I started laughing quite a bit. You know, when I was growing up, I remember some terrible jokes I heard on the schoolyard. When the Challenger exploded, there was a connection to our school. We made some really kind of off-color jokes about that situation. You know, humor's funny. It's sometimes just a way to kind of process really bad bits of information. I've been laughing at tasteless jokes for years. Why do I have to stop now? Why do we have to stop now? On his show, he tells the jokes that I used to laugh at. And no one can stop him because he's got his own podcast network. Now, is his show for everyone? Absolutely not. Makes me feel like a teenager sometimes with some of the sexual material, some of the lusting after women he talks about, and his crew as well. But that's okay. We can do that, can't we? That kind of material should be heard. That's what free speech is about. It's what podcasting is about. It's what the radio used to be about. That's no longer the case, but thanks to people like Anthony Cumia, it is again. And I'm okay with that.
You're listening to the Hollywood in Toto podcast, the right take on entertainment.
Here's the HiT tweet of the week. Mark Hamill is woke. Just how woke, Luke Skywalker? Well, his recent tweet, to my mind, broke the woke meter on Twitter. It's just science. Here's his take on how we should run politics for the foreseeable future. For centuries, men have had their chance to rule government with middling to poor results. Who's ready to let women take charge completely? Just women. I know I am. He was guessing he won't be voting for Nikki Haley for president anytime soon. His brand of woke can only go so far. My HiT tip of the week is Bodyguard. The British show was a smash overseas, and now it's Netflix's buzziest import. Richard Madden stars as David Budd, a security officer designed to protect a home security official. It's a task fraught with some complications, let's just put it that way. I'm being mild. The 6-episode series really caught me with its opening incident. There's a terrorist attack, and of course it was instantly deemed Islamophobic by the usual suspects. Yes, that's me yawning. The series gets a bit thornier from there, and I have to say I'm only in episode 3, but I am absolutely hooked. There's great interpersonal dynamics. There's the specter of the character's PTSD. It hovers over everything he does and says. Really fascinating stuff. Now, there's talk of a second season, but that's not going to show up on U.S. shores or Netflix for quite a while. So for now, just let's enjoy our first taste of Bodyguard, courtesy of Netflix.
Don't touch that dial. You're listening to my daddy's podcast.
Now, let's get to this week's HitCast interview. Brian Godawa loves movies. He's written a few, too, including the Kiefer Sutherland thriller To End All Wars. He's also a self-published novelist, turning his back on traditional publishing houses with really sensational results. His faith-kissed stories don't follow the traditional Christian path, and he's proud to be both different and thought-provoking.
In the primeval history of Genesis, an ancient war began between the seed of the serpent and the seed of Eve. Fallen angels called Watchers begot a race of giants called Nephilim, their goal, to stop the bloodline of the promised seed. But God had other plans. Chronicles of the Nephilim is a biblical fantasy series of novels that charts the rise and fall of the Watchers and the Giants in the stories of the Bible and in between. Read all 8 novels, from Noah Primeval all the way to Jesus Triumphant. Available on Kindle and paperback at Amazon.com. Go to chroniclesofthenephilim.com and enter a world of ancient history and biblical imagination. That's chroniclesofthenephilim.com.
See what I mean? His book, Hollywood Worldviews, Watching Films with Wisdom and Discernment, offers a really smart guide to appreciating films in a new, exciting way. Long story short, you should be following him wherever he goes. And if you're not already, just go to the show notes page at hollywoodintoto.com and I'll show you how. I'm pleased to have him on our HitCast, and I think he's got a lot to say, and a lot of inspiring things to say, too. I think that's a great combination. Here's my chat with Brian Godawa. Brian, thank you for joining the show. I know you're a prolific writer, and you do film writing and books and courses. I'm just kind of curious, as a creative type, I'm always interested in what's on your front burner at the moment. What are you working on right now?
Well, I've got a couple movies that I'm working on, but unfortunately I can't say what they are. But I'm working with the producers of the movie Gosnell, so that'll at least give you a hint of the direction these guys are. I think Anne McElhaney and Phelim McAleer, the producers of Gosnell, are the most courageous, brave filmmakers in Hollywood, because they tell stories. They tell the truth to power. They speak the truth to power with their movies. And so it's an uphill battle, but they're independent filmmakers. So I'm working with them, and we got some cool stuff coming up. Sorry, I can't talk about it now, but I will contact you when we can.
Okay.
And I'm
just fact check what you said. You're absolutely right. I've actually had Anne on this podcast a few weeks back, and those two are amazing. And the way that they approach the material is so interesting and thoughtful and straightforward, and it kind of, in a way, takes their critics out of the knees because they're not getting into the partisan propaganda games. They really just tell it like it is, and often that's the most powerful journey.
Yeah, and because they have a background in journalism and documentaries, they tend to stress the factuality, even in movies like Gosnell, where you're watching this thing and you're going, I can't believe that. That's not possible. And then at the end of the movie, they show you the pictures and the videos that show you the movie was exactly spot on with the most bizarre things that were in there. And they have that mentality. He's done verbatim type theater. So he really, meaning he'll do like theater from a grand jury trial, and just have actors just recount what happened in the investigation or the grand jury trial to show you the truth, And but they do it with drama, and I love that kind of stuff. I'm totally on board, and hopefully we'll be doing some great projects. They'll be coming out in a year or so.
Excellent. Well, I can't wait to hear more about that. I know you can't say it, but maybe we can reveal some information here first on the podcast. One of the things I was looking at your background, and you've got both a marketing background and also design, illustration. Is it specifically? What's your sort of creative, specific arts training?
Yeah, actually, I've always been a visual artist since I've been young. I've always been an artist, but I started out visual, and then I always loved movies. And but when I went to college, I got a degree in graphic design, and I wanted to do movies. And my whole worldview as a Christian changed when I discovered Francis Schaeffer. Francis Schaeffer was a Christian theologian he died like in the late 70s, early 80s, I think. And he was the first Christian intellect who actually valued the arts and showed how the Christian worldview can be integrated without being propagandistic, etc. And that's what changed my life. And I started realizing the power of movies that I loved all my life. So I started to basically learn movie storytelling on the side, and I didn't want to be a starving artist by just jumping out there. So I had my day job for decades as a graphic designer, but I had always pursued movie writing on the side. And then what happened was my first movie finally got made in about 2001. That was To End All Wars, which stars Kiefer Sutherland and Robert Carlyle and stuff. And that's sort of become a classic amongst Christians for, Chariots of Fire for the new generation, kind of a secular movie with a Christian worldview. And but since that time, I've also come in recent years, I've sort of blossomed and started writing novels. And the reason why was because, about eight or so years ago now, I had this great idea to do a movie about a Bible character. And I thought, but Hollywood will love it because it's got weird things, giants and angels and stuff like that. And I thought this is going to be cool. And I wrote a script for the movie Noah, and I called it Noah Primeval. And then shortly after that, I found out that Darren Aronofsky was making his movie Noah, and I knew, okay, he's gonna beat me to the punch. So I realized, well, how can I get my stuff out so that it won't look like I copied him or something? And I decided to turn it into a novel, and then it exploded. Noah Primeval became this bestseller, and it launched me on writing a whole series called Chronicles of the Nephilim, which is basically these retelling certain Bible stories where giants appear or the watchers, these divine beings from heaven type of thing. Sort of weird, bizarre stuff in the Bible, which I'm not afraid to address and to understand. And I thought Christians would reject me because I was pushing the envelope of the imagination. I was doing what Lewis and Tolkien like to do, but I was applying it to the Bible, and I thought Christians were going to reject it, but they didn't. They ended up embracing it, and all the 8 books in the series have been bestsellers on the biblical fiction list at Amazon, and so that's kind of become a new way of me getting my storytelling out to the masses, other than movies, because movies are very difficult to get made. They're basically impossible. So you might get a movie made once every few years, and there are obviously people more successful than that, but a lot of us are good, but there's a big pool of people, so the competition is fierce. So you can just because you're good doesn't mean you're going to get a movie made all the time. So basically, writing that's how I sort of integrate my storytelling in getting it out in many different ways. And also, when you're making a movie, there are a million different compromises. Maybe a Quentin Tarantino will have the finished product be exactly what he wants. But other than that, if you're a screenwriter, if you're a director, you have to kind of take the studio notes. You have to find out what the financiers want. And all of a sudden, your great story that you really felt very proud of and felt like it was very personal and deep, maybe very different than the thing you see on the screen. So at least absolutely. You have a different path. And sometimes it's for good or bad, because, for instance, To End All Wars was just a miracle, a blessing. And what often happens is when you're working in the independent realm, as I do, particularly if you got your first film or something and it's a breakthrough, they're not going to have much money. So they can't keep redoing things. They can't keep repaying other writers to rewrite you because they don't have the money for it, right? So I had the blessing of being the only writer on Two End-All Wars. And that's why I'm most proud of that, of course. But there was a lot of input from the director and the producer challenging the story. And that is what makes it like iron sharpening iron. They'll see things I don't catch, or sometimes there were things I didn't necessarily agree with the director, but it's his picture, and so I try to make my best to make it work. And it turns out usually those situations, if you're simpatico in terms of vision, with a director, then usually it ends up better. Even if it's something I don't really like or necessarily agree with, I'm forced to become creative and make it work, right? Mm-hmm. And sometimes I found that actually makes it better. And so yeah, the artistic side is a very powerful thing. But of course, we all know the stories of writing by committee, and sometimes these executives get involved and they don't know anything about story. It's just really pathetic, and they come in and they just rape the script because they're in control, and that's sad. That does happen.
Talk a little bit. You mentioned how you thought you might lose some readers or some fans with some of the harder core elements, or maybe even just the action, or just the fact that it's a little bit grittier than maybe say a PG rated movie, to make a comparison. Do you think that a lot of the faith-based films today are PG, are clean, are sort of stripped away of that grit, that grime? Are you critical of those movies, or is that sort of they do their stories, they have their place, and there are other ways to tell them? I'm kind of curious how you approach that kind of that strain of the faith-based movie making.
Yeah. I've never really liked Christian movies or Christian this or Christian that in a way, I have liked Christian music, I'll admit that. But I haven't in terms of storytelling and stuff like that. However, I'm not one of the cynical Hollywood types. There are a lot of Christians in Hollywood who are elitists, and they look down and they don't think there's any place for any explicit Christianity or whatever. I'm just not one of those. I'm very open-minded, and I believe there's a room for a lot of genres, and I consider Christian movies to be a genre, or Christian books or whatever, a genre, and all genres have requirements. I don't necessarily like all those requirements, and so I don't want to write like them, and so I didn't with my novels, and therefore I couldn't get an Christian agent. I couldn't get a Christian publisher, so I ended up self-publishing them, and now I'm blowing away all the traditional published books on Bible fiction. And the reason why is because I did have sex and violence, but I tried to do it like the Bible does it. I wanted to show sin in all its evil depravity, because I believe that in storytelling, the power of your redemption in your story is only as powerful as the accuracy of the sin that you're depicting being redeemed from. So if you have this, 1970s, television Snidely Whiplash version of evil that just isn't gritty or whatever, the redemption is not going to resound as powerful. Yeah. That said, I believe there's a place for family, movies that the family can watch together, and I've even written some stuff that hasn't gotten made. I'm willing to do it. But I believe there's definitely a place for that. And I don't have a problem with that. My problem with most of the Christian films has been the production values, the writing, producing, directing, and acting has just been so low level par. But I do believe it's getting a lot better, and it just takes time to catch up. For instance, I loved I Can Only Imagine. I thought it was a great movie. I loved Soul Surfer. There are some of these Christian movies that are good, and they're getting better all the time. So it's getting better all the time.
That's right. Yeah, it's been a nice thing to watch, and it is a fairly young genre in a sense. So I think the learning curve is nice to see. I was kind of curious. I feel like you went the self-publishing route before it was really hip and cool. What's been the secret of that? I mean, obviously, not to dismiss your talent, but what have you learned about that process? And are there lessons for other artists who maybe think that they're outside the system and they want to kind of sell some product?
Well, I'm an evangelist now for self-publishing, so get ready. I'm promoting it with so many writers, because here's the bottom line is, there's prestige and all that of going through traditional publishing, or what we call legacy publishing and such. But the problem is it's the same problem as with movies as with any of these big businesses that have built up, the elites become the gatekeepers, and they determine what gets out or what doesn't, and they claim that they're concerned with the audience, but oftentimes they're not listening to the audience, evidenced by the fact that there are, I am one of thousands, literally thousands of self-published authors who couldn't get a publisher. And it's not because we're not necessarily good. It's that a lot of times it's, no one wants to read romances now, or for me, Christians don't want Bible stories with too much sin in them or whatever, and too much violence, right? And they have all these preconceptions because they're gatekeepers and they keep you out. But what happened with self-publishing is because of Amazon, because our ability now to actually get marketed. You could always put up your own books on your own website, but how do you market it? Amazon itself is the marketing machine that gets the word out and helps you because of that. And that's why there are now thousands of self-published authors who are making, like me, full-time incomes, 6 figures and up, and blowing away the competition. New York Times bestseller list, which is not usually accurate, but it's still there. It's very political, but nevertheless, a lot. You look on that list at any time, and as much as half or more are self-published authors. Self-published authors are blowing away all the competition on Amazon. They're making most of the money. So it's like, and we're talking, I've heard dozens of them who are like making near $1 million a year self-publishing. So the reality to me is that there is a market, even if you've got niche, stories, there's a market for all these genres and all these niches. But the traditional publishers, over time, they become big and fat, and just like anything, just like in Hollywood, they're only looking for the blockbusters. And so they miss the sleeper hits, the Little Miss Sunshines of this world and stuff, right? And I understand, they're driven by money, and therefore they're going to take you if you're already famous, if you're already, got a big audience or, whatever, or they see something in your background and in your story that they think they can make millions on, But there's a lot of mid-level authors now that just aren't being picked up because they're looking for the blockbuster. They need the blockbusters in order to make up for their losses because of how the costs have been skyrocketing because of the way they do business. Yeah. And it's the same thing with Hollywood, right? All the studios are pushing more towards the big blockbusters, the one blockbuster that will basically pay for the entire year. And sadly, it still works to a certain degree, but I do think over time it does collapse on itself. And I think the traditional publishing world that's already occurring. There are self-published authors who have turned down lucrative deals because as soon as you make a lot of money and become famous, even self-published, traditional publishers come after you, right? Because they want to, there's money in this person. And many of the self-publishing, including myself, if I got an offer, would turn it down because it's like, you can't do anything for me that I haven't done for myself, so you're not really needed, and that's really the case. I mean, it's very fascinating. And so there is I think the only stigma on self-publishing is from the elite traditional publishing world, but in terms of audience and readership, the hundreds of millions of Americans and all around the world, it's not a problem. It's just not a stigma.
One last lesson about all this, even the big names, even the folks who have kind of cracked the system, they often were rejected, if not once, multiple times. There's a classic story, and I need to find a link to this. I'll put it in the show notes page, about Burt Reynolds and Clint Eastwood going somewhere, some audition, meeting with some, maybe it might have been Universal, some major studio, and they were both rejected, I think, either by their talent or their physicality wasn't quite right. And of course, look what happened to them. So, that's why self-publishing is so wonderful, because you can avoid all that, get your voice out there, and ultimately the audiences will decide if it's something that's worth their while, or maybe it's not their cup of tea, but at least you can kind of connect with them and make that choice yourself.
Absolutely. And now is the time, because again, because of Amazon mostly, and you could say iBooks, Apple, but mostly it's Amazon. And to me, like I say, I think the key to it is distribution. It's always been the key to the success of the arts and commerce. Is you can have a great product, but if you don't have a means to distribute it and a marketing plan attack, the word doesn't get out and people don't hear about it. And so consequently, now though, because Amazon has things like also bots, you can buy little ads for your books that will, when people are on Amazon, they're already prepared to buy, right? So an ad on Amazon for your little book is like 1,000 times more effective than throwing out some banner ads on the internet. Those aren't even effective. Yeah. And so they've got this whole system of all kinds of things you can do, from advertising to their own algorithms that help you sell your book. Like, for instance, pretty much any book that you put out, the first time you put it out, and this is for every book, the first 30 days, Amazon actually gives you a little bit of an artificial boost. I don't know. I don't know how their algorithms do it, but it's kind of like they make you seen. They get you. The key is visibility. So they help you get more visibility when you first release a book, and then if it grabs and it starts to do well, then it sort of obviously helps itself. So like I say, most of my books are on the top 10 or 20 in biblical fiction on Amazon. So whenever people want, I want to get a book, but I want to read a book about a Bible story. Where do I go? Well, look at the best-selling on Bible fiction on Amazon, and then that's how it sort of, once you get into those top 10 and 20 lists, it helps sell like its own sales machine, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So yeah.
Well, thank God for technology, and it's just been a wonderful thing, and also social media. We're talking with Brian Godawa, author, screenwriter, film critic, and probably a half dozen more titles I forgot to mention, but there's always pressed for time. But I want to talk about movies. You're a huge movie fan. You think cinematically. I was kind of curious if you've seen anything lately that, maybe it's too pretentious to say gives you hope for Hollywood, but just maybe resonated with you that you'd like to share.
Oh, man. You got me on that one. Let's see here. The thing is I watch a lot of Netflix. I watch a lot of stuff. And so I tend to forget specifics, because everything gets all caught up. I'm trying to, let's see if I can find my some of my stuff here. But I will say this.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Please do. But just to start off, though, I wanted to say that my I've been going to the theater a lot less these days. I've always been a movie nut most of my life. Never really liked television until Breaking Bad. And now I think the best writing is on Netflix. Best storytelling is on Netflix, right? It's on basically, series. And so I'm watching so much of that. I just don't like to go to the theater that much anymore. I don't need to, It's like I just finished Daredevil season 3, right? It's like fantastic. It's got this whole, and they're not afraid to have spiritual themes in there. Like Daredevil is all about Daredevil losing and regaining his faith. I mean, it's truly amazing sometimes. I'm surprised how bold they'll actually allow viewpoints and that's because Netflix is a lot more open to the creatives. Mm-hmm. It's challenging the studio system. So I've been watching a lot of series and enjoying series like I never have before. But, Daredevil is one good example of one of the latest ones I've loved.
I agree, too. And just one quick point. It's what I hear the most out of every movie conversation is, I just don't go to the movies as much as I used to. I can't tell you how often I hear that refrain. And I think it's reflected in a lot of things. I think it's sort of Hollywood actors getting very political and maybe kind of pushing people aside. But I also think, like you said, I can just stay home and watch the third season of Daredevil, have a great time, and maybe watch 2 or 3 episodes back to back in the comfort of my home. Or I could roll the dice, go to the movies, pay a lot of money, risk a guy or gal in front of me talking through the entire process, and then seeing a clunker. So it's almost a no-brainer. Totally. But it's at least there is that Netflix and its competitives. That alternative has been wonderful. You're a critic and a creator, and I was kind of curious how that works within your mind because I think sometimes critics forget about the pain that the creators have. And I think the fact that you're a creator as well kind of gives you an edge on other people in your field. Talk about that tension. Is it tension between the two sides of you, and how does that kind of balance? Yeah,
technically it is. Technically it is because you might say the critic side, the analyzing, that's the the worldview, the means, the messages, that kind of stuff, as well as production values or what have you. But mostly I focus more on worldview and story structure. That's sort of my emphasis of appreciation. And yeah, that's what is that? The left brain? I can't remember left or right brain, but that's the one side of the brain. And then the creative is definitely the other side of the brain. And the creative is really, it's more about almost like really working within boundaries. It's like finding the boundaries and then releasing yourself to work freely up to the edge of those boundaries. What I mean by that is, a lot of people have this, notion of, and some even artists do too. It's like, untrammeled freedom to do anything I want. And that's what true creativity is. And no, that's actually narcissism. And in fact, the greatest works of art in history have all been restricted by boundaries, whether it's Michelangelo's, the popes or whatever who forced him to paint the Sistine Chapel, and it needed to be exactly what they wanted, but he painted it greatly within those parameters, right? And so, it's that kind of a thing. And so for me as a storyteller, I love boundaries, whether it's budget or whether it's we have to have a certain amount of, if you're doing a true story, you have to stay within the facts because you don't want to lie, but you've got to be creative. And so it's finding that balance between the boundaries of truth and fiction and making it so it's still an honest, truthful portrayal. And to me, that's the biggest balance of all, because in today's era, in today's, world, I think we see all that throughout our culture, as evidence of the current election fraud and just everything that seems to go on, and Google and Facebook, and how they just don't care about truth or fairness, and they'll lie and change the algorithms to suit their political or particular agendas, and they have no moral problems with what they're doing. They even, they'll talk openly about it. That's the kind of dishonesty, and truthfulness has lost its impact, I think. And truthfulness as in, being honest, fair,
authentic, really.
Yeah, authentic. But I mean, the postmodern sense of truthfulness is my truth, true for me. So I don't mean that sense. I mean it more like objectively, you know what I mean? Uh-huh. And so consequently, yeah, these, and what's so ironic is that really, my argument has always been, from my first book, Hollywood Worldviews, which I wrote, years ago, about how to watch movies with wisdom and discernment. And it's really helped a lot of Christians to not throw the baby out with the bathwater, to be able to draw good truths from movies and not, reject them because, it had a sex scene that I didn't like or something, or it's, whatever, too violent or something. And just helping them to become better discerners. Well, part of that is realizing that, actually good storytelling has a moral compass to it, and it's so funny because even though we live in a world that's lost its moral compass, Hollywood still has to tell stories with a moral compass, because if they don't, they won't make money because stories without a moral compass are not desirable. Classic example. Yeah. Now, look, I'll admit that there are some that break the boundaries, like, for instance, Game of Thrones, right? So Game of Thrones is this nihilistic world that it's very depressing. It's a very well told story, but I think that even that story, at least I haven't read the books, but I can say that even in that world, there still has to have some morality, right? I mean, the first season, everyone was just like, when Ned Stark gets killed, it's like, to me, I'm almost like, I don't want to watch it, And then the rest, I kept going because it's good storytelling and it's partly my job. And, I'll admit I like sometimes the darkness, but if it just continues on without any hope of redemption or any goodness, I can't stick with stuff. But what happens? Jon Snow, he gets resurrected. He becomes the new good guy. I don't know what's going to happen to him, and he struggles. But the point is that even Game of Thrones has this little bit of light that has to be there, or otherwise it would just, people wouldn't want to watch it,
Yeah, and even so, Walter White from Breaking Bad, even though he did a lot of awful things, he in his mind was thinking, I need to protect my family and prepare them for when I'm gone, after I die. And that was his motivation, even though he did some, along the way.
Absolutely. One of the arguments that I made at the time was, I think that what it was it was a tragedy. And if you understand, if you know classical storytelling, comedy has an up ending, tragedy has a down ending, right? But the truth is that tragedies are actually moral stories, because what tragedies are is they show you how not to be by showing the negative consequences of behavior or values. Mm-hmm. So, you watch Othello or whatever, Hamlet, you see them because they refuse to discern what their personal flaw is. It leads them to destruction. And that is it's a reverse version of positive morality. It's what Aquinas called the way of the negative, right? It shows you this is what happens if you don't live according to morality. And I think that that's ultimately what Breaking Bad was. And that's why it was so powerful, because we all knew it. And we all knew he deserved to die in the end. My big complaint about that was his death was too anticlimactic. It should have been a lot bigger. Like, how you have the guy falling from a cliff or a great height or something. Look, I'm not saying he should have done that, but his death was just a little bit too simplistic, and it needed to be more grandiose for us to feel the catharsis of seeing justice done on this guy. And by the way, here's another thing. When I first started watching Breaking Bad, it was a transforming moment in my life, even as a storyteller, because by the third episode, Walter White watches Jesse, I think whatever his name is, Jesse is his helper. He lets his girlfriend die in her vomit. And I turned off the show and I stopped watching it for like months, until I started hearing other people talking about ramifications down the road and things. And I started going, okay, I'll give it another chance. I started watching it. And I'm glad I did, because my point at that time was, what happens is if you have a hero do truly despicable, evil things, then he's no longer desirable to root for unless there's something redemptive in his character, or is there redemption offered? And that's what you're looking for, right? Or the other side is the tragedy. And once I realized, well, this is a tragedy. This is showing how a man falls and descends into the negative consequences. And once I believed that that's what it was about, then I could follow it through to the end. And sure enough it was, because they understood that's what was needed, which is ultimately a very powerful moral compass, And so, yeah, that's the problem that a lot of people, don't, like my wife and other people, where they can't handle the negative stuff that a lot of movies have up front, or a lot of storytelling has up front, because I try to tell them, like, don't worry, most movies are about redemption. So if they start out negative, by the end, they're going to learn not to be. That's usually how most of them are. Not all of them, but most all of the good Hollywood movies are like that.
And I think that speaks to both Hollywood's need for money, that they know that will be successful, but also the humanity of the storytellers, that they may differ from your view or my view about life or politics, but at the end of the day, there's sort of their inner humanity can't help but peek through. But Brian, I love these insights, and if you want to get more insights just like them, you can visit Godawa.com, and that also has a lot of links to your different books and projects and all the things you've got going on at any given time, including the Chronicles of the Nephilim, also the Chronicles of the Apocalypse, and your brand new book, Judgment, Wrath of the Lamb. That comes out later this month in November. So, Brian, thank you so much. I want to talk to you again, and certainly about that upcoming movie project. You've kind of whet my appetite, and I appreciate your time.
You bet. Thanks for having me, Christian.
Well, thanks again for listening. Don't forget to check out HollywoodandToto.com for both the show notes and, of course, the latest entertainment news. Please follow me at Twitter at HollywoodandToto. And we'd love it if you leave a podcast review over at iTunes. See you next week.